All right, so you guys really piled on the reading this time, huh? A whole mountain of material on international business strategy,
Yeah, definitely some dense stuff.
specifically excerpts from a 2024 business course
Yeah.
about frameworks going global, the whole shebang.
Yeah, basically everything.
So we're doing a deep dive to extract the most useful insights for you folks out there,
And hopefully make it a little bit fun too.
like your personal research assistants.
Yeah, exactly. We'll cut through the jargon, give you the need to know stuff like a cheat sheet for world domination.
World domination through business.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so first things first, got to define strategy. We hear it all the time, but what's it actually mean for a company?
Right, right.
Like in your materials, there were some great definitions from, big names, Body K. Chandler hit.
And the interesting thing is they all sort of emphasize different aspects of strategy. Like K really highlights the connection between a company's internal capabilities and its external relationships. Like, you might be great at making widgets, but if nobody wants to buy your widgets, that's not really strategic.
It's like being a fantastic baker, but opening your shop in the middle of the desert.
Exactly.
Skills matter, but so does context.
Great.
One thing I thought was interesting that you had in your materials was this idea of strategy as practice.
Ah,
What's that all about?
That's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Okay.
It's one thing to have a beautifully crafted strategic plan, but if you don't actually put it into action, it's just a piece of paper.
A very expensive piece of paper, potentially.
Exactly. And Whittington, he argues that, it's not just about this top-down decision-making, but middle managers, the people dealing with the day-to-day,
Right.
they're crucial in shaping how a strategy is implemented.
Okay, so it's not just the CEO making these grand pronouncements
Right.
from their ivory tower. It's really everyone in the company working together.
Working together, making adjustments, decisions in real time.
Okay, love it. And then, of course, Mintzberg coming in and kind of throwing a wrench in the whole thing with emergent strategy.
Yeah.
That perfect plan might go out the window when reality hits.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, you can plan and plan and plan,
Right.
but inevitably something unexpected will come up.
You can't predict everything.
Exactly. And that's where emergent strategy is all about being able to react, adapt, and even turn that unexpected challenge into an opportunity.
Like you think about a company launching a product overseas.
Yeah.
They can do all the market research they want,
Mm-hmm.
but then, boom, some totally unforeseen cultural taboo pops up,
Oh, yeah. I've heard of so many stories like that.
and they're left scrambling
It's true.
to adapt. So
Yeah.
that emergent strategy,
Being able to think on your feet.
be flexible.
Absolutely.
Okay, so companies are trying to navigate all of this complex strategic landscape, but ultimately it's all about one thing,
Profit.
profit.
Yeah, exactly.
Wilcox defines profitability as the rate of return on invested capital.
Right.
And he emphasizes that both profitability and profit growth are key.
Mm-hmm. It's not enough to just make a profit. You need to keep growing that profit to increase the company's value.
It's like investing.
Exactly.
You're looking for that return, and you want that return to keep growing.
Yeah, you want to see that upward trend.
All right, so how do companies actually achieve that sweet, sweet profit? You had Porter's competitive strategies in your materials.
Ah, yes. Porter, the classic framework.
OG.
Low cost or differentiation.
Walmart or Apple.
Exactly.
Find your lane and excel at it.
It's all about finding your niche. What are you going to be known for?
All right, so Walmart's all about efficiency and low prices appealing to those budget-conscious shoppers.
Mm-hmm.
Apple, on the other hand, is all about, sleek design, cutting-edge technology, attracting customers willing to pay a premium for those features.
They built a whole brand around that idea of luxury and innovation.
Right, but it's not just about choosing a lane, right? It's actually about building your company around that strategy, and that's where the value chain comes in.
Ah, yes, the value chain.
It's like a blueprint for how a company creates value.
From raw materials to the final product in the customer's hands,
I always picture it like a giant assembly line with each step.
adding a piece of the puzzle.
R&D, procurement, production, marketing, distribution, it's all connected.
And what's fascinating is that each link in that chain can be a source of competitive advantage.
Okay, so you're saying each step can make a company stand out.
Exactly. Like, think about Amazon. They're known for their logistics and distribution network.
Right.
That's a core part of their low-cost strategy.
Makes sense, because if they can move things quickly and efficiently, that keeps costs down.
Yeah, and that allows them to offer lower prices and faster delivery times.
Which is what customers want these days.
Exactly.
It's amazing how something like logistics, which, most people don't even think about,
Right, it's behind the scenes.
can be a key differentiator.
But it makes a huge impact.
And then we can't forget about those support activities, right?
Yeah.
The stuff like HRIT, even company culture.
Oh, yeah, they're essential.
They might not be directly involved in making a product,
Right.
but they can make or break a company's ability to execute its strategy.
It's all connected.
Okay, so we've got this value chain,
Mm-hmm.
and companies are trying to be as efficient as possible. And that's where those economies of scale come in, right?
Yeah, the bigger you are, the lower your costs per unit.
Which makes you more competitive.
Right. You can offer more attractive pricing.
Makes me wonder, though, is bigger always better?
That's a great question. And the answer is, it depends.
Okay, so...
Sometimes smaller companies can be more nimble, more responsive.
Right, they can adapt quickly.
Exactly. But in industries with high fixed costs, like manufacturing scale, can be a major advantage.
So it's about finding that right balance between scale and agility.
Exactly. But it's not just about what's happening inside the company, right?
Okay.
The external environment plays a huge role.
Right. It's not enough to just focus on your own strengths and weaknesses. You have to be aware of those opportunities and threats out there in the global market.
Exactly. It's like you're playing a game. You need to know your own strengths, but you also need to be aware of what your opponents are doing.
Love that analogy.
And that's where those strategic analysis tools come in,
Okay.
like SWOT and Minimax.
SWOT, the classic.
Yeah, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities,
Yes.
threats.
So internal and external factors.
Right. And Minimax takes it a step further, forces you to think about how to leverage those factors to your advantage.
So it's not enough to just know your strengths and weaknesses. You have to think about how to use them strategically.
Exactly. It's like playing a game of chess.
Okay.
You've got to anticipate your opponent's moves and plan accordingly.
So minimize a weakness to maximize a strength.
Precisely.
Love it again. But SWOT and Minimax, those just tell part of the story, right?
Right.
We also need to think about the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
The political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal forces that can shape entire industries.
And that's where PESTEL comes in.
PESTEL is a mouthful.
It is, but it's basically a way to scan the horizon for any potential disruptions or opportunities.
Okay, so it's like a giant game of Risk. But instead of conquering territory,
Yeah,
you're conquering markets.
exactly.
And it's not just about military might. It's about understanding the political landscape, the economic conditions, the cultural nuances.
Seeing the whole board.
It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, but it's essential for success in international business.
Speaking of seeing the whole board, there was one framework that I found really interesting.
Yeah.
The CAGE framework, developed by Gemawatt.
Oh, yes.
All about understanding the distance between countries.
The distance.
Yeah, distance.
I thought we were talking about a flat world where, technology makes borders irrelevant.
Well, it turns out distance still matters, and it's not just about geography.
Okay.
Gemawatt identifies 4 types of distance.
4 types.
Yeah, cultural, administrative, geographic, and economic.
Ah.
And those distances can create barriers to entry for companies trying to expand internationally.
That makes sense. So it's not just about finding a cheap place to manufacture your product. You have to consider those cultural differences, regulatory hurdles.
Even things like time zones, language barriers.
Absolutely. And those distances can vary depending on the industry.
Okay, so give me an example.
Sure, like a software company might be less affected by geographic distance than a company that makes heavy machinery.
Right, because software can be delivered digitally.
Exactly. But those big machines need to be physically transported.
So you're saying a company selling luxury goods might be more sensitive to cultural distance than a company selling basic commodities.
Precisely. Luxury goods are often associated with specific cultural values and aspirations.
And those vary widely around the world.
Exactly.
This is making me realize just how much goes into crafting a successful international business strategy.
It's a complex puzzle.
With all these interlocking pieces.
And that's where Gemawatt's AAA model comes in.
AAA.
It provides a framework for thinking about how to create value across borders.
Okay, I like it.
He offers 3 approaches: adaptation, aggregation, and arbitrage.
Okay, break those down for me. What do those fancy terms actually mean in the real world?
All right, so adaptation is all about tailoring your business model to fit local needs and preferences.
So you're embracing those cultural and geographic differences and using them to your advantage.
Exactly. And it's not just about tweaking your product.
What else?
It can involve adapting your marketing, your distribution channels, even your organizational structure.
So you're really molding your company to fit the market.
Precisely.
Okay, what about aggregation?
Aggregation is about finding efficiencies and economies of scale.
Gotcha.
by standardizing as much as possible without sacrificing local responsiveness.
So it's like a hybrid approach.
Exactly, finding that sweet spot between global consistency and local customization.
I like it. And then there's arbitrage.
Ah, yes, arbitrage. This
Yeah.
is all about exploiting differences between markets.
Okay, so give me an example
Sure. Think about Walmart sourcing from China.
where labor costs are lower.
Exactly. It's about playing the global market to your advantage.
That's pretty savvy. But with all these different frameworks and approaches, how do companies actually decide which strategy to use?
That's a great question, and that's where we get into the 4 basic international business strategies.
Okay, hit me with them.
International, multi-domestic, global standardization, and transnational.
Okay, so 4 main options, each with its own pros and cons.
Exactly. And each one can be mapped on a spectrum based on the pressure for cost reduction and the pressure for local responsiveness.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into those strategies. First up, international, also known as home replication. What's the gist of that one?
So the international strategy is essentially an exporting strategy.
Okay.
Companies focus on their home market and export their products and services to other countries.
So it's like dipping your toes into the global pool without diving in head first.
Exactly. It's a relatively low-risk way to test the international waters.
What are the advantages of that approach?
Well, you don't have to make significant investments in foreign markets,
Right.
and you can leverage your existing infrastructure and expertise.
But it's not without its downsides, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges?
Well, one challenge is dealing with higher transportation costs,
Okay.
tariffs, which can eat into your profit margins.
Right.
You also have less control over distribution and marketing in foreign markets.
So you're kind of at the mercy of your local partners.
In a way.
Yes. Okay. Got it. So it's a good way to test the market, but might not be sustainable in the long run.
Right.
If you're serious about expanding globally, what about the multi-domestic strategy?
So the multi-domestic strategy is all about local responsiveness.
Yeah.
Companies tailor their products, their marketing, their operations to fit each market they enter.
That makes sense for companies selling consumer products that are very culture specific.
Absolutely, like food or personal care items.
What are the key advantages of this approach?
Well, the big advantage is that you can really connect with local customers.
By offering products and services that meet their specific needs and preferences?
Exactly. You're also less vulnerable to currency fluctuations and political risks.
Because you're operating more like a local company in each market.
Precisely.
Sounds expensive, though.
It can be. You're essentially creating a mini version of your company in each country.
Wow, that's a big commitment.
It is, but the payoff can be huge if you can capture a significant share of those local markets.
So high risk, high reward. What about global standardization? That sounds pretty self-explanatory.
It is, this strategy is all about maximizing efficiency and minimizing costs by standardizing everything as much as possible.
So one brand, one product, one message.
Yeah, it's like a global cookie cutter approach.
Who are some companies that use this successfully?
Think Amazon, Apple's, Mac, Intel, Texas Instruments.
Okay, so big names in tech and manufacturing.
Exactly. They all prioritize global consistency and cost reduction over local adaptation.
Got it. So it's efficient, but not very flexible. Which brings us to that final strategy, transnational.
Ah, yes, the holy grail of international business.
What's so special about this one?
Well, it tries to balance global integration with local responsiveness.
So it's like the best of both worlds.
In theory, yes, but it's also the most complex and challenging strategy to implement.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice?
It requires a very sophisticated organizational structure, a lot of coordination across different markets.
Here are some companies that have pulled it off.
McDonald's, Nike, Coca-Cola are great examples.
So they managed to maintain a consistent global brand.
While still adapting to local tastes and preferences.
Like the McDonald's menu, I'm guessing?
Exactly. You'll find the Big Mac and fries pretty much everywhere, but
Yeah.
you'll also find regional specialties like the McSpicy Paneer Burger in India.
Or the McLobster in Canada.
Exactly.
So there's no single right answer. It's about finding the strategy that fits the company and the industry.
Precisely. And keep in mind, strategies evolve over time.
Okay, so you might start with one approach and shift as the market changes.
Exactly. It's all about being adaptable and responsive.
That's a great point. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about understanding your own company, your target markets, and the competitive landscape.
Absolutely. And that's what makes international business so fascinating.
It's a constantly evolving puzzle, and there's always something new to learn.
Exactly.
All right, so we're back and ready to dive deeper into these strategies, right?
Yeah, you got it. Picking up where we left off with those 4 main strategies: international, multi-domestic, global standardization, and Transnational.
All right, so let's talk more about that last one, transnational, the one that's all about finding that balance between global reach and local touch.
Yeah, the holy grail of international business, right?
It sounds great in theory, but how does it actually work? Like, how do companies manage to pull it off?
Well, think of it as a global matrix. Companies have to manage multiple dimensions all at once. You got to be efficient, got to be cost conscious, but also responsive to local needs. They need to leverage their global knowledge and resources, but also empower those local teams to make decisions.
That's a lot about finding the right balance.
Exactly. It's like conducting an orchestra where each section has its own unique sound, but they all have to play together to create this beautiful symphony.
So it's not just about having offices in different countries.
Right. It's about creating this truly integrated global network.
Okay, so how do you actually do that?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is finding that sweet spot between centralization and decentralization. Too much centralization, and you risk becoming out of touch with those local markets. Too much decentralization, and you lose the benefits of global scale and coordination.
So how does that actually play out, in a real company?
Well, take McDonald's, for example. They have a globally recognized brand and standardized processes for, their core operations.
Right, the Big Mac's got to be the Big Mac.
Exactly. But they also allow local franchises to adapt their menus and marketing to suit local tastes.
So the McSpicy Paneer in India.
Exactly. And they're not just slapping a different label on the same burger. They're actually creating products that appeal to those local palates.
So it's like finding those core elements that are consistent globally, but allowing that flexibility and adaptation at the local level.
Exactly. It's like having a global recipe book, but each chef can add their own personal flair to the dishes.
I like that. And then we've also got Nike.
Another great example, they have a strong global brand and a centralized approach to product development, but they also have those regional hubs that are responsible for marketing and distribution.
So they're tapping into local trends and connecting with consumers in a more authentic way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think about the way Nike sponsors local sports teams and athletes. It really helps them build that credibility and loyalty within specific communities.
So again, it's about striking that balance, right?
Yeah, it's about being global, but also feeling local.
Okay, so transnational, it's like the ideal, but it's also really difficult to pull off, right?
Definitely not for the faint of heart. It takes a lot of organizational sophistication and commitment, but when it works, it can be incredibly powerful. You get that global scale and that local relevance all in one.
The best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do companies actually decide which of these strategies is right for them? Like, is there a process? Is there a framework? Is there something?
Well, it's not always a clear-cut decision. It's often a combination of factors. You've got the company's industry, its resources, its goals, even its culture.
It's almost like choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You wouldn't use a hammer to screw in a light bulb, right?
Absolutely not. So what you're saying is it's about understanding those nuances and picking the strategy that makes the most sense in that particular context.
Right. And also remember that strategies can evolve over time. A company might start with a simpler approach, like an international strategy, and then move towards something more complex, like transnational, as they gain more experience, grow their presence globally.
Makes sense. It's like starting with baby steps and then gradually working your way up to those more ambitious challenges.
Exactly. And it's important to be flexible, be able to adapt as the global landscape changes, because what works today might not work tomorrow. The business world's constantly evolving, and companies need to be agile and responsive.
Agile and responsive.
If they want to stay ahead of the curve.
So, speaking of starting small, what advice would you give to a company that's just beginning to think about going global?
Do your homework. You got to research the markets you're considering, understand the cultural nuances, the regulations, the competitive landscape. Don't just assume that what works in your home market will automatically work elsewhere.
So due diligence.
Due diligence and preparation. Don't just jump in without looking.
Good advice. Don't just jump in.
And don't be afraid to start small. Maybe start with a single market or a specific product line. Test the waters, see what works, learn from those mistakes, and adjust as you go.
It's like learning to ride a bike.
Yeah.
You wouldn't start on a mountain trail. You'd start in a park with training wheels.
Exactly.
Okay, sound advice, sound advice.
Yeah.
But even for companies that have already established a global presence, there are always those challenges. Like one of the biggest has got to be managing that complexity,
Oh,
right?
yeah, absolutely. As companies expand their footprint, they've got to deal with those multiple time zones, languages, cultures, regulatory environments. It can be really overwhelming.
I imagine it's like trying to juggle 100 balls at once and they're all different sizes and shapes.
That's a great analogy. And then you've got the challenge of staying ahead of the curve when it comes to technology and innovation. Things are changing so rapidly, and you have to constantly be adapting to those new trends and technologies.
It's like a never-ending race, and the finish line just keeps moving further away.
Exactly. And it's not just about keeping up with the latest gadgets. It's about being able to anticipate those future trends, those disruptions.
Be proactive.
Proactive, not just reactive.
Got it. Companies have to be forward-thinking and willing to take risks and experiment.
And foster that culture of innovation and agility where employees are encouraged to think outside the box and challenge the status quo.
It sounds like a tall order.
Yeah.
But also incredibly exciting, right? The world of international business is full of challenges, but also those opportunities for growth, learning, innovation.
Absolutely. It's a dynamic and ever-evolving landscape, and those who can navigate it successfully, they're going to reap the rewards.
Okay, so speaking of rewards, what are some of the key benefits of going global? Why should companies even bother with all of this complexity in the first place?
Well, you've got access to new markets, increased revenue streams, diversification of risk, and access to talent and resources. Let's break those down.
Access to new markets? That seems pretty self-explanatory. Expanding your customer base.
Exactly. By expanding into new countries, you can tap into those new customer bases and potentially increase your sales significantly. This is especially important today because a lot of domestic markets are becoming saturated.
Makes sense. Okay, so what about increased revenue streams? How does going global help with that?
Well, by selling your products or services in multiple countries, you can generate revenue from multiple sources. It's like having those multiple streams flowing into a river. It makes for a much stronger and more stable flow of income.
Ah, so it's about spreading the risk a little bit.
Exactly. If one market slows down, you've got others to pick up the slack.
And that leads us to the next benefit, diversification of risk.
Right. By operating in multiple countries, you can reduce your exposure to economic downturns or political instability in any one particular region. It's like having a diversified investment portfolio. You wouldn't put all your eggs in one basket.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Solid advice.
And then finally, there's the benefit of access to talent and resources. Expanding internationally, you can tap into a wider pool of skilled workers, as well as get access to new raw materials, technologies, and manufacturing capabilities.
So it's like opening up this whole new world of possibilities.
It is.
But of course, with all of these potential benefits, there must be some risks and challenges as well.
Of course, going global isn't without its risks. You've got cultural differences to navigate, language barriers, regulatory hurdles.
And then there's always the risk of political instability or economic downturn.
Exactly. So it's a balancing act, weighing those potential rewards against the potential risks.
So it's not a decision to be taken lightly.
Definitely not. And that's where that careful planning, research, execution comes in. You need a clear strategy, a strong team, and be willing to adapt and learn.
So again, it's all about finding that right fit for your company, your industry, your goals, the specific markets you're targeting.
Exactly. There's no magic formula for success in the global marketplace, but by understanding those different strategies and frameworks that we've been talking about, companies can make more informed decisions and hopefully increase their chances of success.
Okay, so we've laid a really solid foundation here, talked about those fundamentals of strategy, the importance of that external environment, the different approaches that companies can take to compete on a global stage.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have, but now it's time to take it to the next level. In part 3, we'll be diving into some specific case studies of companies that have actually successfully navigated those challenges and opportunities of international business.
That's right. We'll look at how they've applied these strategies and frameworks that we've been talking about to achieve that global success.
Sounds good to me. I'll see you then for part 3. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. It feels like we've been on this whirlwind tour of international business strategy.
Yeah, for sure.
And now it's time for the grand finale.
The culmination of all our hard work.
We talked the talk. Now it's time to walk the walk right. See how these strategies play out in the real world?
Exactly. Nothing brings these concepts to life like looking at actual companies and seeing how they've used them.
Because let's face it, sometimes those theoretical frameworks can feel a bit abstract.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So you've got some case studies lined up for us. Companies that illustrate those 4 main strategies: international, multi-domestic, global standardization, and transnational.
I do. We've got a company that perfectly exemplifies each one, showcasing those wins and those potential pitfalls.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with your first case study. Who are we looking at?
Let's start with the international strategy and a company that revolutionized the way we work, Xerox.
Xerox, a copier company.
Exactly. Back in the 1960s, they were the name in photocopying, completely dominating the U.S. market. Their international strategy was pretty simple. Export those machines everywhere.
Well, it makes sense. They had a fantastic product, a strong brand. Why not just ship it all over the globe?
That was their thinking.
Hmm.
But as Wilcox points out in your materials, this approach has its limits. It's a good starting point, but it doesn't let you really tailor your offerings to each market.
Or build those deep local relationships.
Exactly.
So what happened to Xerox? Did they stick with this strategy?
For a while, but they soon faced some fierce competition from companies like Canon, who were taking a more localized approach.
So Canon was adapting their machines and marketing to specific countries,
Precisely. And Xerox had to play catch-up
evolving their strategy to become more globally integrated.
and responsive to those local needs.
It's a classic example of how the game can change and companies need to adapt or risk falling behind.
Right. It's all about staying ahead of the curve.
Okay, so that's international. What about multi-domestic?
Let's look at a company that's a master of local adaptation, Johnson & Johnson.
J&J, the consumer goods giant.
They seem to have a product for everything, right?
Seriously?
Yeah.
So how do they manage to be so globally present but still feel locally relevant?
It all boils down to decentralization, empowering those local teams. J&J has this massive network of subsidiaries all around the world,
Right, they're everywhere.
each with a high degree of autonomy. They can adapt their product offerings, marketing campaigns, even their packaging to fit those local tastes and preferences.
So can you give me a specific example of how they do this?
Sure, think about skincare products. What works for someone in a humid tropical climate might not work for someone in a dry, cold climate.
Two totally different needs.
So J&J subsidiaries develop and market products specifically designed for the regions they serve, using ingredients and fragrances that really resonate with those local consumers.
So like they're not just selling products, they're selling solutions.
Exactly. Tailored to those specific needs, and that kind of local expertise is invaluable.
Okay, so J&J is all about that local touch. What about that global standardization?
For a complete contrast, let's look at Amazon.
Amazon, the e-commerce behemoth that seems to be taking over the world.
One package at a time.
Exactly.
They are a prime example of a company that leverages technology scale and operational efficiency to offer a standardized experience to customers all over the world.
So they're basically saying, this is what we offer, take it or leave it, and it seems to be working for them.
It is. They're laser focused on delivering that consistent customer experience no matter where you are. Think about their website, their app, their delivery network. It's all designed to be seamless and standardized.
Right, it's all about efficiency.
Exactly. And this lets them achieve those massive economies of scale and keep prices low, which is a huge part of their competitive edge.
Makes sense, but doesn't that limit their ability to cater to those local preferences,
There are cases where they've had to make some tweaks.
to accommodate regulations or cultural sensitivities?
Right, but for the most part, their global standardization approach has been incredibly successful.
Okay, so we've seen international with Xerox, multi-domestic with J&J, global standardization with Amazon. Now, what about transnational?
We talked about McDonald's and Nike, but there's another company I want to highlight, Caterpillar.
Caterpillar,
Yeah,
the heavy equipment manufacturer.
you got it. They might not be as consumer-facing as some of the other companies, but they've quietly built this global empire by carefully navigating those complexities of different markets.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Wilcox actually uses them as a prime example of how a company can evolve its strategy over time, moving from a more international approach to a more transnational one.
Okay, so how do they manage that?
They started by focusing on exporting their machines from their U.S. factories.
So that classic international strategy.
Yeah, but they quickly realized that to really succeed in those global markets, they needed to establish a local presence, build those relationships with customers and suppliers.
And adapt their products to those specific local needs.
Exactly. So they standardized certain core components and processes like their engine technology and their manufacturing standards.
To maintain efficiency and quality control.
Right, but they also allowed for those local variations in design features, even language support.
To meet the unique needs of customers in different regions.
They had to find that balance between global consistency and local responsiveness.
Not an easy feat. So they really mastered that art of think globally, act locally.
They did, and it's paid off. Caterpillar is now a global leader in their industry with operations in over 180 countries.
Wow, that's impressive. These case studies have been so helpful. They really take those abstract strategic frameworks and show how they actually work in the real world.
Right, they bring those concepts to life.
And they highlight that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to international business.
Absolutely. The right strategy depends on so many factors, and it can change over time.
It's a journey, not a destination, right?
Exactly. So what are the key takeaways from all of this? What should our listeners be thinking about as they craft their own international business strategies?
Yeah, that's the big question. What have we learned from all this?
The biggest takeaway is that international business is complex. It's dynamic. It's full of challenges and opportunities. There's no magic formula for success, but there are frameworks and strategies that can help companies navigate this complexity and make those smarter decisions.
It seems like it boils down to finding the right fit for your company, your industry, your goals, and those specific markets that you're targeting.
Exactly. And there's no substitute for careful planning, thorough research, and flawless execution. You also got to be adaptable, innovative, and willing to learn from your mistakes.
And your successes.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today, a strategic toolkit for tackling that global marketplace.
We've equipped them with the knowledge and hopefully the inspiration to take on the world.
And remember, folks, this is just the beginning. The world of international business is constantly changing, so stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring. There's always more to learn.
That's right. The journey never ends.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into international business strategy. We'll be back soon with another episode exploring a whole new topic. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep.